The clock is operating, ladies and gentlemen. We are recording here at Gateway Technical College, Advanced EMP, Gateway Technical College, Tuesday and Thursday. This is Tuesday, November 10th, 2015. I'll be your moderator, Timmy, or your facilitator. That's what I'm talking about. All right, let's review. This whole thing right here, this whole thing is the nephron. Say yeah. What blood is filtered by the nephron? Arterial or venous blood? Arterial blood, because it is under pressure, right? So blood from the renal artery, as it makes its way into the kidney, the blood vessels, that renal artery gets smaller until they terminate at the level of this artery that takes the blood to be filtered by this ball of capillaries, the glomerulus. That artery that takes the blood to get filtered towards the glomerulus is called the afferent arterial. And it is under pressure. You got me? The glomerulus is like how I like to describe it as a spaghetti strainer, right? So when you make spaghetti, right, you cook it and then you dump the water and the spaghetti into the strainer. The hope is that the spaghetti strainer catches the spaghetti and lets the water go through. So the big stuff that's in your blood that should never be found in urine are what? What are the three big things that, because they're so big, should never be found in urine? Number one, red blood cells. Number two, white blood cells. And number three, albumin. So if you are peeing blood, peeing pus, or peeing egg white, you are in trouble. You got me? So whatever is not filtered by the glomerulus leaves the glomerulus through the efferent arterial. And the efferent arterial then forms a network of capillaries that surround the collecting tubules where stuff is actively secreted or actively reabsorbed back into the blood. So some things cannot be filtered by the glomerulus effectively, so they have to be actively secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the collecting ducts, into the urine. Things that have to be secreted are potassium, hydrogen ions, and our buddy, our pal, creatinine. And this isn't 100% true, but it's pretty true. Things that cannot be filtered, that have to be secreted, when the kidney begins to fail, the first thing that happens is the secretion process begins to fail. So what happens to your creatinine, your pH, and your potassium level? That's right. Your pH drops because you're increasing the amount of hydrogen ions. Your potassium level goes up, so you develop hyperkalemia, and your creatinine level goes up, which is the gold standard for assessing kidney function. That will go up. Are you with me? Now, if you look at the basic structure of the kidney. Let me erase some of this stuff. This is the important piece. So watch. This part of the kidney right here is called the cortex. You learn this in general. And most of the nephrons in the kidney are referred to as cortical nephrons, meaning the glomerulus begins in the cortex. Then you have these little things that look like pyramids. These are called the renal pyramids. And the renal pyramids make up the medulla of the kidney. This is the important piece that I want you to understand. And I went over this before, but it's important. As you move deeper and deeper into the medulla of the kidney, what happens to the osmolarity? What happens to the osmolarity of the peritubular capillaries? What happens to it? So if you were to draw a line here, let's say here, yeah? As you move deeper and deeper into the medulla of the kidney, what happens to the osmolarity? It progressively goes what? Up. So the osmolarity of the kidney goes up. It starts out at 300, then it goes to 600, then it goes to 900, then it goes to 1200. So that means as this stuff that was filtered by the glomerulus, that filtrate, moves deeper and deeper into the medulla of the kidney, it becomes basically saltier and saltier. The osmolarity goes up. Very salty, less salty. You got me? So the concentration of what's in the peritubular capillaries, there's much more stuff and less water. Then as you move up, the osmolarity does what? It goes down. Okay, so this is important. All right, so let me erase this. I wonder if there's a way to erase just all of it all at once. There should be, huh? Oh, I got this big eraser. Look. Well, now that you, yeah, then you broke it. Yeah, you know, I'll tell you, kids. All right, well, it'll be erased now. All right, so there we go. So I'm going to do it my way. That doesn't work. Okay, so remember, the formed elements of the blood are not filtered. So what you're filtering is the watery part of the blood, the plasma. So you are filtering water, electrolytes, right? Amino acids, right? Glucose. You got me? Vitamins, right? Fatty acids. Stuff that's small enough to get through the glomerulus. So, and that's basically the small particles that are in the plasma and the water that's in the plasma. Are you following me so far? All right, so watch. So the stuff that is filtered by the glomerulus is caught by this little capsule that surrounds the glomerulus called Bowman's capsule. And then it's going to enter the first part of the collecting ducts. And the first part of the collecting ducts is called? That's right, or the PCT, the proximal convoluted tubules. Now, the normal osmolarity of the blood is about 300. So the filtrate, the stuff that is filtered, also has an osmolarity of 300. And approximately 70% of the stuff that got filtered by the glomerulus that ends up in the proximal convoluted tubules gets reabsorbed back into the blood. This is both passive and active, meaning that some of that stuff has to get pumped back in. So the proximal convoluted tubules, the cells that make that up, are loaded with mitochondria because you need ATP to pump stuff against the concentration gradient, right? And on average, about 20% of the plasma is filtered each minute by both of your kidneys. Are you with me? All right. So, and in the proximal convoluted tubules, that stuff gets reabsorbed either passively or actively, and it does so isoosmotically. And what that means is, what was the osmolarity of the plasma when it got filtered by the glomerulus? And so when it gets down to the end of the proximal convoluted tubules, what's the osmolarity? It's 300. But 70% of that stuff that got filtered got reabsorbed. Are you with me? Now, watch. Then you're going to start moving deeper and deeper into the medulla of the kidney. What's going to happen to the osmolarity within the peritubular capillaries as you move deeper into the medulla? It goes up. And this is the important piece. What's the osmolarity of the filtrate going into the descending limb of the loop of Don-Henle? What's the osmolarity? It says it right there. 300. But as you're moving deeper and deeper into the medulla, the osmolarity is going up, right? So the only thing that can get reabsorbed back into the blood in the descending limb of the loop of Don-Henle is water. So water will get reabsorbed back into the blood by osmosis, because water always moves from an area of low osmolarity to an area of high osmolarity. So the peritubular capillaries, that osmolarity is 600, but what's the osmolarity of the filtrate? 300. So water will get reabsorbed back into the blood until the osmolarity of the filtrate and the osmolarity of the peritubular capillaries is the same. So the osmolarity of the filtrate is going to become 600. Then it moves deeper, right? Then more water is going to get reabsorbed. Say yes. And then it's going to become 900. And then finally at the bottom, the osmolarity is 1200. So water is going to get reabsorbed here. So this is how the kidney is able to retain water. I'll explain how hormones affect it in a minute. So now you're going to move up the ascending limb. The osmolarity of the filtrate is very, very concentrated with solutes, glucose, all that stuff. But the only thing that can get reabsorbed here is solute stuff, electrolytes. So this is where the electrolytes get reabsorbed. Sodium, calcium, magnesium, potassium. All of the electrolytes get reabsorbed there. And because this is high osmolarity, and as you're moving up, the peritubular capillaries have low osmolarity, so you're moving the stuff from high osmolarity to low osmolarity. Stuff is moving. You got me. Then the osmolarity here is back to 300. But then you get to the thickened portion of the ascending limb. And in this thickened portion, electrolytes are pumped back in. So you're pumping electrolytes using ATP, and you're pumping sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, right? You're pumping all of those back into the blood. So if you're removing stuff from the filtrate, what happens to the osmolarity of the filtrate? It goes down until you have an osmolarity of about 100. Now that filtrate that is very, very dilute, is going to enter the distal convoluted tubules. And the distal convoluted tubules, this is where hormones take effect. And the three hormones that affect the distal convoluted tubules are, and I want these, And if I don't get them, what's going to happen? Mark your whole life wrong. Number 1, aldosterone. Number 2, ADH, antidiuretic hormone. What's the other name for antidiuretic hormone? Vasopressin. And number 3, atrial neurotic peptide? Natriuretic. Atrial natriuretic peptide. Say yeah. Better known as AMP. Are you with me? EE. And once these hormones take effect, what is filtered now will end up in the collecting ducts. You better write this down. In the absence of hormones, the collecting ducts are impermeable to water. So whatever water ends up in the collecting ducts in the absence of hormones, that will be your urine. And most hormones, these 2 hormones in particular, ADH and aldosterone, increase blood volume. So they suck water back from the collecting ducts into the peritubular capillaries. AMP is the only hormone that lowers your blood pressure. All of the other hormones that affect fluid volume and cardiovascular function work to raise your blood pressure. AMP lowers it. Say yeah. So now we will begin our discussion of the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, or RAS. Say yes. Say RAS. Yes. You're late. Okay. Did you notice now that I have a tremendous grasp of the obvious? Are you with me, guys? Okay. I want this whole thing. Here we go. Where is it? Here it is. I tried explaining this one time to students, and their head exploded. It actually exploded. I saw it happen. Whole thing here. Whole thing here. Here we go. One of the functions of the kidney is to maintain long-term blood pressure. And it does that through the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone mechanism. Are you with me? All right. Let me give you a little background information. Renin, write this down, is an enzyme. And what do enzymes do? They speed up chemical reactions. They make chemical reactions happen quicker. See, yeah. See, this is another example of an enzyme that doesn't end in ACE. Renin is also a Fleetwood Mac song. Renin. You got me? All right. So watch. Connected to the afferent arteriole are specialized cells called juxtaglomerular cells. Juxta means next to. Look, these cells are next to the glomerulus. Juxtaglomerulus. Huh. And these juxtaglomerular cells respond to stretch. It says stretch. Looks like stretch. But it's stretch. So watch. 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 Are you watching? Think of the afferent arteriole as a bike tire. if your bike tire deflates, what does it do? It gets flat. And if the afferent arteriole, there is a drop in blood pressure, the afferent arteriole is going to go flat. And when the afferent arteriole goes flat, what's connected to the afferent arteriole? Juxtaglomerular cells. So when it goes flat, what are you going to do to those juxtaglomerular cells? You're going to stretch them. And when there is a drop in blood pressure and the afferent arteriole goes flat, you are going to stretch the juxtaglomerular cells, and the juxtaglomerular cells respond to stretch, and when they're stretched, they release into the blood an enzyme called renin. Say yes. Say yes. Deb Dupois, got my money. Better write this down. What kind of cell is this? A liver cell. Because I wrote 2 curved lines in a circle, and then I wrote liver. Continually produced by the liver, but in its inactive form, is a chemical compound called angiotensinogen. Anything with gen after it, gen equals inactive. Are you with me? So the liver produces angiotensinogen and dumps it into the blood. But what was released by the juxtaglomerular cells because the afferent arteriole went flat because there was a drop in blood pressure? Renin. And renin is going to turn on angiotensinogen into the active form called, you better write this down, angiotensin 1. Are you with me? I'm going to help you on your cardiovascular quiz today. Watch. Watch. What's the goal of the cardiovascular system? Maintain blood flow, maintain Q. So if renin was released because your blood pressure was low, what do you think renin's going to do? Raise your blood pressure. So angiotensin 1, which is now activated by renin, right? Angiotensin 1 was made from angiotensinogen, but renin was released because your blood pressure was low. Angiotensin 1 is a mild arterial constrictor. And it will take arteries that were like this and constrict them all over. So what's going to happen to resistance to arterial blood flow? It's going to go up. And to maintain Q, what has to happen to systolic blood pressure? It has to go up. Tell me you got that. How many people are with me? Yep. Now watch. Who's watching? Kristen, you watching? Angiotensin 1 only is active for about 30 minutes. But in that life, in that 30 minutes, it lived a full life. It went to Gateway Technical College. It got a degree in culinary arts. Didn't get to go to graduation, though. So they have now, one of the rooms for cooking is named Angiotensin 1. Are you with me? Angiotensin 1, while it's active, circulates primarily to the pulmonary capillaries. And in the lining of the pulmonary capillaries, I want this, there is an enzyme called ACE. ACE is the type of enzyme your mom told you to stay away from. He wears a leather jacket, got tattoos, and he has a pack of Marlboro Light Menthol 100 in a box rolled up in his sleeve. And he says stuff like to you, I ain't got time for you, baby. I'm going out with the fellas. April, just so you know, I hate me too. ACE stands for, you better write this down, angiotensin converting enzyme. Where is it found primarily? In the lining of the pulmonary capillaries. Are you with me? And when angiotensin 1 encounters ACE, she says, I ain't going out with you. I got a man. So ACE says, hey, baby, you ain't going nowhere. Angiotensin converting enzyme converts angiotensin 1 to the much more powerful and longer lasting angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 is a massive arterial vasoconstrictor. So it's going to take arteries throughout your body that were like this, and it is going to constrict them. So what's going to happen to resistance to arterial blood flow? It's going to go up even more. And what's going to happen to your systolic blood pressure? It has to go up to maintain Q. How many people are with me? But the most powerful effects of angiotensin 2 are on the adrenal cortex. Where does the adrenal cortex sit? Above the kidney. You're not going to believe this. I must have went over this before. I think I did. In another class. Far, far away. You're not going to believe this. But you have. You better write this down. You better write this down. Who's writing it down? Anybody? Embedded in the cells that make up the adrenal cortex, you have receptors called angiotensin 2 receptors. You have them on the cells that make up the adrenal cortex. You also have angiotensin 2 receptors on the muscular wall of arteries. So when angiotensin 2 is produced from angiotensin 1, ACE converted angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, angiotensin 2 is going to bind with angiotensin 2 receptors, and it is going to cause the release of the hormone into the blood from the adrenal cortex called aldosterone. And what's going to happen to all the arteries as a result of angiotensin 2 binding to angiotensin 2 on the muscular walls of the arteries? They are going to, what are they going to do? They're going to constrict. Say yes. How many people are following me so far? Guys? Guys? Here we go. Aldosterone exerts its effect on the distal convoluted tubules. I want this whole thing. Embedded, write this down, embedded in the cells that make up the distal convoluted tubules, embedded in the cells that make up the distal convoluted tubules is a pump called, you're not going to believe this, this is new, never heard this before. It's called the sodium potassium pump. I'm going to take a moment for you to kind of bring that in. And what the pump does is it takes 3 sodiums that we're going to get peed into the toilet and pump them back into the blood. And it will take 2 potassiums that we're going to remain in the blood and pump them into the tubules. When sodium moves from the distal convoluted tubules into the blood, what is going to follow by osmosis? Water. So what will happen to your blood volume as a result of aldosterone stimulating the sodium-potassium pump in the distal convoluted tubules? What's going to happen to your blood volume? Your blood volume is going to go up. And when your blood volume goes up, that increases venous return, preload to the heart. And when the volume goes up, that increases the stretch of the ventricles, the right and left ventricle. First the right. And if the ventricles are stretched more, what's going to happen to the force of contraction? Boom. And what's going to happen to stroke volume and systolic blood pressure as a result of aldosterone working its magic? It's going to go up. And when your blood pressure goes up, it goes up where? Including? And when there's an increased pressure in the afferent arteriole, the juxtaglomerular cells won't get stretched. So what will happen to the release of renin? Do you see this? Do you see this? How many people see this? These things are happening all the time. So you always have a little bit of renin circulating. You got me? Tell me you got that. So that means you always have a little bit of angiotensinogen getting converted to angiotensin 1. Ain't that right? And that also means that you're going to have a little bit of angiotensin 1 getting converted to angiotensin 2. Say yeah. So if you have high blood pressure, you could give someone a medicine that stopped ACE from working. You would give them an ACE inhibitor. How long does angiotensin 1 last? 30 minutes. Angiotensin 2 can last for days or weeks. The effects of aldosterone can last for months. Say yeah. So when you see a drug that ends in ill, captopril, lisinopril, enalapril, those are ACE inhibitors. Jimmy teaching you pharmacology. No one will explain this to you. That's a fact. Now watch. Where's ACE found? That's right. And what's associated with every pulmonary capillary? Alveoli. Through mechanisms that I will not explain, but I do know them. So don't try me. When people are given ACE inhibitors, it will produce a dry cough. And people don't like the cough. So instead of giving an ACE inhibitor, real smart people with tape and pocket protectors came out with a newer drug. That newer drug, you're not going to believe this, doesn't inhibit ACE. It blocks angiotensin II receptors. Where do you have angiotensin II receptors? On the adrenal cortex and on the muscular wall of the artery. That drug that blocks angiotensin II receptors is called an angiotensin II receptor blocker, or an ARB. That is also the thing that flies around in those ghost story shows. The ARB. And it comes in and goes in and people start acting crazy. See, yeah. How many people followed that for real? I am glad this is recorded, because I did this beautifully. It's beautiful. That explanation is flawless. Yep, flawless. And here's the thing. You're going to have access to that when you get into clinical. Unless you irritate me. Then I block you. That's right. No April. How many people follow that for real? That is how an ACE inhibitor and an ARB works in controlling blood pressure. Here's the thing. ACE inhibitors and ARBs not only are arterial vasodilators, but they reduce blood volume. Because what do they inhibit? What do they inhibit the release of from the adrenal cortex? Aldosterone. And if aldosterone is not released because you took an ACE inhibitor or an ARB, watch it, then what's not stimulated? And sodium's not pumped back into the blood, so the water won't follow, so you'll pee out that excess sodium and water, reducing your blood volume, reducing venous return, reducing the stretch, reducing the force of contraction, and therefore reducing the stroke volume and systolic blood pressure. Thank you very much. Say yeah. Rock on with my bad self. Okay. Wait. Can I show you something? Did I ever show you the video on Unforgiven? I never showed you that? Okay, I'm going to show you that. Have you seen the movie Unforgiven? Never seen it? With Clint Eastwood? You got to see this movie. It's fantastic. Now listen, if you've never seen it, just real quick up, Clint Eastwood used to be a bad dude.